Happy Friday, everyone. I am coming fresh off of a tweet that is likely to lose me hundreds, if not thousands, of followers. And it feels good. Happy Friday. Glad we made it to the end of the week. We're going to be talking about the deportations of pro-Palestine activists, which is a spicy topic. And this actually might be the first time that some of you are seeing me talk about something that you might sharply disagree with. And I'm hoping that you consider this an opportunity to have an open mind and consider perspective, because I am here to stand for nuance and the truth as best as I can discern it. And although I largely agree with the Trump administration and what they've done up to this point, I don't agree with the way that they're approaching this particular event. And I'll dive into why for a moment so that we can get through some of the nuances and figure out what we collectively agree with the truth is. The second thing I'm going to be talking about is the new Canadian incoming prime minister's announcement that Canada and America's relationship is ending. So he's saying it's not us, it's you, and he wants to divorce us. Can he actually do that? I don't really think so, but we'll talk about that in a moment. So to first frame things, you guys have probably already been hearing about Mahmoud Khalil. Mahmoud Khalil was a organizer at Columbia University who has been organizing protests in the wake of Hamas's October 7th attack. And those protests have been going on throughout the majority of last year and persisting into this year. And they've gotten out of hand. We've had students being prevented from going to class, Jewish students getting harassed, buildings getting taken over, property getting vandalized. It's been a huge mess and a nightmare for, I imagine, many of the Columbia University students who are either pro-Israel or pro-Jewish or really just want to go to class and not be involved in all of this stuff. And a few weeks ago, what happened was the Trump administration arrested Mahmoud, detained him, and there's currently a legal proceeding about whether he can be deported out of the United States. Now, there's a lot of, let me say, imprecise thinking around this that I want to just level set around so that we're at least on the same page about what we're even talking about. And as I say this, I'll note that I've put out several videos about the Mahmoud Khalil situation that you can go check out if you want some in-depth analysis of the arguments for and against deporting him. And to be honest with you, originally I was on the side of, yeah, we should deport him. And I'll be honest with you, I think I had some bias. I think I was just kind of, yeah, I think I had bias and I was like, yeah, this guy is pro-terrorist, pro-Hamas, let's just get rid of him. But then I realized, wait a second, I need to actually look at the case and try to come up with the best argument against the case that I'm making. And when I did that, I found a decently compelling case for deporting him. And I kind of just like, okay, yeah, I think the evidence is there, just deport him. That said, one of the things I realized here is I'm the one who had to come up with an argument for deporting Mahmoud Khalil myself. I didn't hear that from Marco Rubio. I didn't hear that from Caroline Levitt. I had to come up with a much stronger case for deporting Mahmoud Khalil than I was hearing from my own government, which was, for me, a fundamental problem. Because look, many of the people who are attracted to me and my message, obviously, you know that I'm supportive of Trump. Some of you also know that I used to be on the left and now I'm supportive of Trump, which makes me unique. But ultimately, I'm supportive of Trump because I think that he will produce a better government than the opposition would have. I'm supportive of Trump because I think he will do best by the American people relative to the other options. I'm supportive of his government because I think it will do best by the governed. I don't support people just because I like them. I support them because these are public servants who are serving the will of the people. And when they take an action that is supposed to be on the behalf of the people, but they're not making it clear on why it is, and then the people themselves need to make up the justification, that is not a sustainable way to govern. Now, I want you to watch the clip I'm about to put up of Secretary of State Marco Rubio talking about his justification for deporting another pro-Palestine activist, Ramesia Ozturk. And I want you to just pay attention to what he's saying. Ignore for a second whether you actually agree with these people being deported. We'll get to the merits of that. I just want you to hear the justification and ask yourself, does this sound like a specific justification for deporting a specific person using specific evidence? So check this out.
visa. It's an F1 visa, I believe. We revoked it, and here's why. And I'll say it again. I said it everywhere. Let me be abundantly clear, okay? If you go apply for a visa right now, anywhere in the world, let me just send this message out. If you apply for a visa to enter the United States and be a student, and you tell us that the reason why you're coming to the United States is not just because you want to write op-eds, but because you want to participate in movements that are involved in doing things like vandalizing universities, harassing students, taking over buildings, creating a ruckus, we're not going to give you a visa. If you lie to us and get a visa and then enter the United States and with that visa participate in that sort of activity, we're going to take away your visa. And once you've lost your visa, you're no longer legally in the United States, and we have a right, like every country in the world has a right, to remove you from our country. So it's just that simple. I think it's crazy. I think it's stupid for any country in the world to welcome people into their country that are going to go to your universities as visitors. They're visitors. And say, I'm going to your universities to start a riot. I'm going to your universities to take over a library and harass people. I don't care what movement you're involved in. Why would any country in the world allow people to come and disrupt? Now, we gave you a visa to come and study and get a degree.
Wait a second. Can you guys actually hear this?
Not to become a social activist that tears up our university campuses. And if we've given you a visa and then you decide to do that, we're going to take it away. I encourage every country to do that, by the way, because I think it's crazy to invite students into your country that are coming onto your campus and destabilizing it. We're just not going to have it. So we'll revoke your visa, and once your visa is revoked, you're illegally in the country and you have to leave. Every country in the world has a right to decide who comes in as a visitor and who doesn't. If you invite me into your home because you say, I want to come to your house for dinner, and I go to your house and I start putting mud on your couch and spray painting your kitchen, I bet you're going to kick me out. Well, we're going to do the same thing if you come into the United States as a visitor and create a ruckus for us. We don't want it. We don't want it in our country. Go back and do it in your country. But you're not going to do it in our country.
Okay, great. So look, Rubio's rationale, I think, is sound. He's saying that when you're here in the US as a non-citizen, we have the right to revoke your visa if you are doing things that are contrary to the interests of the United States. Okay, fair enough. Now, it's not enough to just take his word for it generally, right? Because we do have actual laws governing what's contrary to the interests of the United States. Specifically, in our immigration law, there's two things that are relevant to this particular case. One, there's a clause that says if you're endorsing or espousing terrorist activity, then we have the rights to revoke your visa or revoke your green card and remove you from the United States. Second, if you're doing something that seriously jeopardizes the interests of the United States when it comes to foreign affairs, we also have the right to revoke your visa. Cool. I'm not disputing that at all. I support America's right to deport non-citizens who are supporting terrorist organizations or acting in a way that seriously jeopardizes our foreign affairs. None of that is an issue. But what did this woman do specifically that falls under either of those clauses? Does anyone know? Do you guys know? What has Ozturk specifically done that is pro-Hamas? Or what has she specifically done that compromises our foreign policy? And the reason this matters is because the government derives its power from the governed. Part of that power is not just predicated on technicality, it's also predicated on trust. So some people have said to me, okay, well, maybe they haven't produced evidence, but maybe it's confidential, which would be a fair case, right? Like maybe they have evidence that they just haven't disclosed to the public, but they didn't say that. Essentially, what he said is this person is doing things that are contrary to the interests of America, but he didn't cite specifics. Now, I want you to imagine the reverse here. Imagine this were the Biden administration. Or if that's too unbelievable for you, imagine in 2028 or 2032, the Democrats take back control of government. Would that be a satisfactory response to you if they were deporting someone who you didn't disagree with? Right? Like imagine if Biden's government had designated the January 6 people as terrorists. Imagine if they said that the Proud Boys were domestic terrorists. And then they said, because they're domestic terrorists, we are going to deport them to Guantanamo Bay. And imagine that they didn't provide any evidence of what they did on January 6th. They just said they staged an insurrection. They just gave you general language. Would that be a satisfactory response to you? The point here is that there needs to be a standard. And the reason that the standard needs to be applied is because the standard protects you, whether you're in power or out of power. Right now, the political right is in power. MAGA's in power. Trump is in power. Many people agree with that. Many people who are watching agree with that, right? Because I've been aligned with that side. But that won't always be the case. So when that's no longer the case, what will protect you from your government? Like maybe you completely trust Trump. Okay. What protects you from the person who comes after Trump? Now, in the Mahmoud Khalil case, I'll get to it in a second, but in the Ozturk case, it's actually very, very light because I've done research. The only thing I was able to find that Ozturk maybe has done that could be construed as pro-Hamas, and this is a real stretch, is she wrote an op-ed in the Tufts University newspaper calling on the university to divest from pro-Israel interests. That's not pro-Hamas. There's plenty of people who are pro-Palestine and not pro-Hamas. And that's merely penning an opinion in a newspaper. That's not even participating in a protest, much less leading a protest. So what's the evidence here? And maybe I'm missing something. I'm open to the idea that, hey, maybe someone in the chat has a video that they could link me where this lady is agitating and she's taking over buildings and doing all those things. Great. If so, I would like to see it. And then that will revise my thesis on what's going on. But as far as I can tell, no one can find anything like that. So what is she getting deported for? And is it good enough for you, Marco Rubio's word? Why is his word good enough for you now? I mean, in fact, there are many people within the MAGA movement who didn't like it when Marco Rubio was chosen as Secretary of State. And they considered him a rhino, Republican in name only. But now that he's affiliated with Trump, we're just going to say, yeah, I just agree with him and I trust him no matter what he says. Now, to be clear, I'm not someone who has a default skepticism of governments, but the more proof I get, the more trust I give. So if I'm not getting any proof, why should I give trust? And, you know, there's people who are on X who are more plugged in and following this stuff closely, who like to say things like, oh, well, you know, when I got a green card, I knew that I shouldn't participate in any kind of protest because it could jeopardize my rights to be here. Fair enough. And especially in Mahmoud Khalil's case, I'm not very sympathetic because if you're coming to the country on a visa or a green card, it makes sense that you should be on your best behavior because, yes, there are laws that limit your rights. Like you don't have full First Amendment protections. You don't have the right to do whatever you want. And at the same time, if someone violates the terms of their being here, shouldn't the government be producing the evidence that they did so rather than leaving everyone in the dark as to what's going on? So this is about principles, not preferences. Me personally, I don't have a dog in the fight of Israel-Palestine. Frankly, I don't feel particularly well educated. I don't have a personal connection to it. I view the whole Israel-Palestine conflict from a lens of America first. I want to understand what should we be doing that is best supportive of the interests of America. And I say that because I believe that if every country looks after its own interests, then everyone in the world is going to be better off. Take care of your own home, and then our collective home is going to be better off. So this is not about Israel versus Palestine for me. And yes, Hamas is a terrorist organization. But what's the proof that Ozturk was supporting a terrorist organization? And why is that important? Well, it's important for public trust. It's not just about technicalities because a lot of political capital and the ability of a government to get things done relies on public trust and perception. And every time the Trump administration pulls from the piggy bank of public trust, but does not reinvest in that bank by doing something that reinvigorates our trust in their leadership, it erodes public trust and it dampens their ability to get things done. And I want you to watch this clip because this is the clip that much of America is seeing, and much of America is not on board with the Trump agenda yet. So check this out.
You guys covering your faces? You want to take those masks off? Is this a kidnapping? Yeah, you don't look like it. Why are you hiding your faces? Why are you hiding your faces? Can I see some faces here? How do I know this is the police? Seems like bullshit to me. Certainly looks like it. Bit of a kidnapping going on here?
Okay, so that's what the country is seeing. Okay, they're seeing an image of a woman walking alone on a sidewalk, being accosted by masked men to be brought into a van, while our Secretary of State is not saying specifically what she did. He's talking generally about his theory and philosophy around under what grounds a visa should be revoked. The most specific claim that we've heard is that she has been supportive of Hamas. How? Now, some people in the chat, and I'm glad that people are in the chat engaging, right? Because you guys are making some great points, and I want to acknowledge, Grey Wolf just said, is an ongoing investigation. They must feel they have enough proof against her to arrest her. They cannot openly discuss an open investigation. I'm not so convinced that they can't discuss an open investigation. Right? If the case was that, oh, they have evidence, but they can't share it with the public, shouldn't he just say that? Right? Like, why leave people in the dark? Why should we on a chat on X and Facebook and Instagram and everywhere people are tuning in from right now have to come up with reasons why our government is doing something? The government serves the governed. The burden of proof is on them, not us. And again, if the roles were reversed and we saw something happen in the Biden administration where they just picked up someone off the street and threw them into a van, of course we would demand specific evidence of what was done. Frankly, we would do that even if it was a non-citizen, right? Because people have a default mistrust of the Biden administration. So you're not going to just take the Biden administration's word for us. So am I saying you need to be as skeptical of the Trump administration as the Biden administration? No, because I think in the first 2 months, this administration has been light years more transparent and competent than the Biden administration was. And still, trust is earned, not just given. So here's my concern here. It's about standards, because everyone is fallible. Even leaders with the purest of intentions are fallible. And the reasons that we have checks and balances is to guard against the demons of our own nature, to guard against our own proclivity for zealotry and seeing red, right? Because this administration is moving with all deliberate speed, and they're really determined to accomplish what the public mandate was for the first 100 days. I think that's great. And at the same time, any laxity in standards that is demonstrated now will be used against the people who are supportive of Trump when the people who are supportive of Trump are no longer in power. That's what happens. And that's the deeper political problem, by the way, that's been facing this country for decades. It's not a right or left problem. It's a problem of the people not being served by their government, irrespective of a party. And while I think that Trump represents a distinctly different DNA of politician. He's not really fundamentally a politician. He's a business person who stepped into public service, which I actually think is much more aligned with the founding fathers' vision. We have these standards and these norms so that those who are out of power are protected from those who are in power. And we recognize that the balance of power swings from left to right, and it always will. So yeah, I'm personally very uncomfortable with the fact that people are just getting arrested and deported or almost deported, and we're not actually getting specific answers as to what they did. And just to be clear, they don't even need to commit a crime. Like, the standard of proof is not beyond reasonable doubt. That's not what's going on here. I'm not asking for that. I'm just asking for a specific explanation. Because if this woman has been supportive of Hamas, if she's been supportive of public, then it should be easy to provide public evidence. If she's been supportive in private and for some reason disclosing that private information would compromise national security, they can literally just say that verbatim. Hey, we have some private information. You're going to have to trust us, unfortunately, because we're not going to disclose it to you because it would jeopardize America. Say that. Even that builds a degree of trust. But this, it doesn't. It doesn't. And to say another thing, the reaction of the people to politicians who do this creates division within the people. Because one trend I've noticed is, there are many like conservatives and MAGA people who seem to not be able to say anything critical of the Trump administration, which is dangerous, not just for us as individuals, because again, everyone is fallible, but it's also dangerous for building actual trust, because there's half of the country who feels like if these guys run roughshod over democratic norms and things are actually in danger, is the other half of the country even going to say something, or are they just going to go with these people no matter what they do? So look, I'm nuanced. I'm not neutral. I obviously have my own leanings, but even in having those leanings, I think it's important to stay clear-eyed and to constantly be critical and think from first principles. We're not talking about people. We're talking about problems. Okay, doesn't have to be some sweeping indictment of Trump or sweeping indictment of Marco Rubio. We don't need to talk about people. We can talk about the problems. And if any government official is taking extreme action, like deporting someone who has a life here and not presenting specific evidence for why they're doing so, even if that evidence doesn't rise to the standard of beyond a reasonable doubt, that's cause for concern. And moreover, look, I would like to believe that they do have this evidence, but for some reason, they're not only not giving it to us, they're not even mentioning why they can't give it to us. Okay, I would like to believe that. Well, if that's the case, the only way we're going to get that answer is if we, the people, demand it. Right? Like, why would they be forthcoming with the evidence if we're just going to say, yeah, well, we just trust you no matter what? So that's what this is about. And ultimately, when I started on my political journey last year, I was not supportive of Trump at first. The thing that inspired me and frankly frustrated me about what was going on was I just felt like the government was not serving the people and the media was complicit in lying about it. That was the thing I was very frustrated with. Originally, I was on the RFK train. It took me a while to get on the Trump train. But fundamentally, I just want my government to serve us. Okay? These people are supposed to be servants. It's supposed to be a noble duty to be in office. And I want that whether they're red or blue, whether they're right or left, liberal, conservative, Democrat, Republican, it doesn't matter. And we need to hold the standard. Otherwise, the standard won't be met. Because you train people on how to tolerate you. And if we tolerate this from politicians, that's what we're going to get. Now, I will say with the Mahmoud Khalil situation, it's different. Because whereas with Ozturk, there was pretty much just an op-ed that she's published that had no explicitly pro-Hamas sentiment in there. Maybe she's privately pro-Hamas, just to be clear. I'm open to the idea, but there's definitely nothing in that op-ed. And it's not even like our elected officials cited the op-ed. That's something that internet sleuths found. Mahmoud's case is different because he was organizing protests at Columbia University. He was negotiating on the behalf of Columbia University Apartheid Divest, which is an organization that has made explicitly pro-Hamas statements. There's still a question, though, of, hey, to what extent is he liable for what CUAD or Quad said? Because he was a lead negotiator. Okay, does that mean that he was just the go-between on a temporary basis between Columbia University and Quad? Or does it mean that he was actually one of the leaders of Quad and organizing and approving press releases? See, that's something that is worth exploring, right? There's like a reasonable discussion to be had there. Because there's also a risk of guilt by association, right? And this is one of the poorest forms of argumentation that I see in politics. Oh, this person knows this person, therefore this person believes what this other person believes. Really ridiculous form of argumentation. However, Mahmoud's case is different because he was the lead negotiator for Quad. So I could see an argument that Quad, which has said stuff like October 7th was a military, moral, and political victory, I could see an argument for saying, hey, look, he's responsible for this organization as a leader. As a result, we're going to deport him because that's pro-terrorist organization and pro-terrorist rhetoric. Okay. They should be making that argument, though. I shouldn't be doing that. I spent hours researching that. I was like deep diving into the dustbin of videos and having to sort through fake videos versus real videos and look at statements, look at screenshots, figure out if it's a real screenshot. I shouldn't have to do that. That's not my job. That's the government's responsibility to justify their own action. So again, if the government has dirt on Mahmoud that the rest of us don't have, prove it. But it's not like they haven't tried to at least indicate that they have some evidence. For example, Caroline Levitt in a press conference said, hey, I have examples of flyers that were given out at a protest that Mahmoud led. I have it on my desk. Okay, show us a flyer. Right? Like the stuff is simple. Just show us the flyer and then prove that he gave out the flyer or that he was complicit in that. Or if you're going to argue that the flyer being given out at a protest that he was organizing, even if he did not have knowledge of it, he's still liable for it, make that argument. But instead, what I see is misdirection. And as a concerned citizen, that makes me concerned. I don't want to see hand waving and talking about the general theory of visas. I don't want to hear analogies about if someone comes into your house and starts being destructive, you have a right to kick them out of your house. Show me specifically how this specific person was specifically destructive. That's all. So look, some people are going to disagree with me and they're going to say things like, well, these people hate America. That's subjective. Okay, that's subjective. But even if some of these people do hate America, you still need to prove that they did something that warrants their dismissal. Do I want people here who hate America? No. If I could wave my wand and remove every person who's calling for the, Marxism and open borders and this is stolen land and all these things and America's evil, capitalist, white supremacist country, and I could be like, hey, let's just like go our separate ways. Yeah, I would wave my wand and do that. But that's not how this country was built. We're built on not just religious pluralism, but pluralism of philosophies. We're built on the idea that we can disagree with someone, but respect their right to say the things that we disagree with. So whether someone hates America, even as a non-citizen, is not sufficient grounds, because even non-citizens who hold visas or green cards have limited First Amendment protections. And those protections are limited in certain situations, like, again, endorsing or espousing terrorist activity or taking part in action that seriously compromises U.S. foreign policy. But that hasn't been proven. So that's my fundamental concern here. It's not that I have some special love for Mahmoud Khalil. It's not that I have some special love for Palestine or Israel. It's like, look, to be frank, Palestine and Israel are not places that I was thinking about before October 7th. I don't have any personal connection to those places. As a human, I wish those fellow humans the best. I want people to stop dying. I want terrorism to stop. I want people to be at peace. But that's the limit of my authentic interest in those situations. What I am interested in is American principles being upheld, irrespective of administration, irrespective of whether I agree or disagree. And I do support non-citizens not having the same degree of rights as citizens. I do agree that when you are a non-citizen here on a green card or a visa, you're essentially here on a trial basis. I think that's okay. And there's a deeper constitutional discussion to have about whether the Constitution allows for that two-tiered system of rights, right? The way that we derive this idea that non-citizens can be deported is through something called plenary powers. So it's an interpretation of, I believe, Article 2 of the Constitution, that the executive has the authority to take unilateral action to deport people for national security interests if those people are non-citizens. That's a Supreme Court interpretation of the Constitution, though. That's not necessarily explicitly laid out in the Constitution, but it's been upheld over time. And there's an interesting discussion to be had about whether plenary powers need to be adjusted. But to the extent that plenary powers exist, and to the extent that we tell people when they're coming into the country, hey, just so you know, like, you can't just do whatever you want when you're here. Like, it's not like Mahmoud didn't know that there was risk. He knew he was doing something risky. So, I'm not here crying over him. And at the same time, if we're going to take action, it needs to be proven. And can the government technically do this? Yeah. Of course they can technically do things. They can technically do all sorts of stuff. And the government is imperfect. So don't you want a government that's not just doing things on a technicality, but doing things that you trust? And shouldn't your trust be built on proof, not just belief? So that's where I stand on this. And I want to just invite you to this more flexible way of thinking about it, because, sometimes I post and I see people say, people saying like, oh, I unfollow you. It's like, okay, you disagreed with me, you unfollow me. Okay, you weren't really here to actually engage in nuance. You were here to just be agreed with and read stuff that you agree with, which I don't think is healthy as an individual, but sure, like, don't follow me. That's totally fine. But this is just imagining the bigger picture and abstracting beyond just what's happening in the present day and looking toward the future. Because I guarantee you, there will be a similar situation when the left is back in power and they do something that the right doesn't like, and the left will say, what about Mahmoud Khalil? What about Ozturk? I was on Piers Morgan earlier this week. Some of you are watching me because of Piers Morgan. Probably not all of you watched the whole thing, but there was a point at the beginning where one of the gentlemen, who was constantly talking about race, when I found that annoying, but he said, oh, well, you guys are calling the Tesla vandalism terrorism when you didn't call it terrorism when these white people like Timothy McVeigh engaged in terrorism, which A, I think is incorrect. I'm pretty sure people were calling Timothy McVeigh a terrorist, but B, it's besides the point. It's like, okay, if you didn't apply the standard in the past, it doesn't mean that you don't apply it now. Standards are supposed to be objective. They are supposed to persist irrespective of subject. And the more that the standard is not applied in the past, the more dishonest people in the future will use that as justification for not applying the standard in the future. Now, let's talk about Jewish students, right? Because absolutely, I don't want Jewish students getting harassed, just like I don't want any group getting harassed. I don't want white people getting harassed. I don't want women getting harassed. I don't want men getting harassed. I don't want Chinese people getting harassed over COVID. I don't want anyone getting harassed. I don't want Black people getting harassed. No one should be getting harassed. Of course not. There should be disciplinary action proportionate to the harm should, of course, be met out. And there does come a point where someone has done enough stuff to revoke their green card under the law. But no, it's not the case that merely harassing Jewish students is grounds for dismissal according to the law. Now, do I think that maybe someone should be expelled from the university? Yeah. Do I think that they should be able to be brought to court and there should be legal penalties? Yeah. Do I believe that if it's criminal, they should be thrown in jail or kicked out of the country? Yeah. But simply saying, well, Jewish students are scared and they're being harassed. Sorry, that's not enough. It's not enough. And when we make these arguments, essentially, it's like what the left does, where they're like, okay, well, this group feels this way, so any action against anyone who made them feel that way is justified. No, that's not how law works. It's about standards. So of course I feel for Jewish students who have felt uncomfortable about the actions of a subset of pro-Palestine protesters at Columbia University. Of course. And we need to be specific about what specifically was done. Was it criminal or civil? Was it a violation of immigration law? who specifically did it, who in connection with that person is liable, and what should happen to that person. I just want specifics, not generalities. It's the same thing when I see the woke left talking about things like systemic racism. It's like, what does that mean? Can we be specific? What specifically was done to whom? And what is a proportionate consequence? So it's similar to, there was a bill, many of you may not be aware of this, but Congress tried to pass an anti-Semitism bill, or combating anti-Semitism bill. And it passed the House 320 to 91. So overwhelming bipartisan support. And you see the name, and of course it sounds good. Like, who wants anti-Semitism? Like, of course we want to combat anti-Semitism in this country. But then you look at the details of what they were inserting into the law to do that. One of the things that they were doing was naming certain dissent against the state of Israel as anti-Semitism, because what they did is they tried to take the International Holocaust Remembrance Association's definition of anti-Semitism and enshrine that as law. Now, this stuff always sounds good in practice. Like, yeah, of course, let's protect Jewish students, but the how matters. The how matters. If we're going to say that any critique of Israel is anti-Semitism, well, you might support the state of Israel and think that's a great thing, but eventually the pendulum swings back in the other direction. And absolutely, we should not make dissent against a specific government authority illegal in America. So fortunately, that bill never got to Senate. I don't know if it ever will. And I would say that's an example of good intentions being executed in a bad way. Let's not do things that way. Because what it also does is it emboldens the actual anti-Semites, right? Because then the actual anti-Semites say stuff like, "Oh, you see, you are giving Jewish people a special classification, and this government is controlled by a secret Jewish cabal." So it just arms those people even more. It doesn't actually bring healing and final resolution to all of this. Like, if you want to actually resolve the core problem, then what you need to do is have rational policy making that is standardized and is not being applied specific ways to specific groups, irrespective of which specific group is being persecuted. Like, imagine if during COVID we had tried to pass a bill that was the combating anti-Asian hate bill, and we made it illegal to say that COVID came out of Wuhan, out of the lab in Wuhan, and we made it illegal to criticize the government of China. Very dangerous precedent. Of course, we wouldn't want that to happen. So again, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. I get that people have good intentions, but emotional policy making always backfires. And that's what I'm getting at. We're talking about principles, because hopefully, I hope that Trump resolves the Israel-Palestine conflict in short order. Right? They've been making good progress with the hostage exchange and the ceasefire and all these things since he got into office, actually even prior to him getting into office. And I really hope that peace is brought to that region, because what is happening on both sides is absolutely horrible. Like, it's horrible that there are children in Gaza dying. It is horrible what happened to Israelis on October 7th at a festival with people being killed and raped. It's horrible that Israelis have been basically trying to survive in the Middle East since 1947. It's horrible, the conditions in Gaza. It's horrible that Hamas essentially has the Palestinian people as hostage. It's all horrible. And we can't allow our reactionary impulses in the moment to override our rational faculties, because we need to be putting in place policies that are timeless. Not policies that are just reacting to whatever the most emotionally charged thing is at the moment. So I say all of that recognizing there may be things I don't know. I am totally open to that possibility. Not in the administration. Maybe Secretary of State Marco Rubio has mountains of evidence that Mahmoud has secretly been back channeling to Hamas, and Ozturk has too, and we need to get these people out of the country. Great. Either let us know what that evidence is, or let us know that you have that evidence. But don't tell us that, yeah, these people are supportive of Hamas. Out. That doesn't work for me. And I would hope that it doesn't work for you either. Because ultimately, politicians serve the people, not the other way around. So they have to prove to us. Okay. Let's keep on going here. Whoa, we have 44 minutes. Damn, we've been talking about this for a minute. So, first, I'm going to check to see if my subscribers have any questions. So if you're a subscriber and you're watching the stream, as a thanks for being a subscriber and supporting what I'm doing, I give you the opportunity to ask questions I answer on stream. Now, here's the catch. I can't tell who's a subscriber just looking at the chat. So if you have a question that you want to ask me, I invite you to either you can DM me, or I would actually prefer that I leave a thread up in the subsection on my profile where you can post the question privately, or on the stream. Like if you go on X and you see my stream is live, if you go to the comment section, go ahead and comment and it'll show me that you're a subscriber and I'll answer your question. Okie dokie. So let me just take a moment to see if there's anyone who has any questions. Otherwise, we'll keep it rolling. Okay. All right. Let me check Instagram and YouTube here. And again, you can ask the questions right now. And if I see it now, I'll get to it. If I don't see it now and I see it after the stream, I will still answer you. It'll just be next stream, which will be Monday at 1 p.m. Almost there. All right, let's move on and talk about something we all probably agree on, unless you're Canadian, I guess. Sorry. Let's talk about this recent statement from, it looks like Canada's incoming prime minister on his new vision for his relationship with America. So check this out.
The old relationship we had with the United States, based on deepening integration of our economies and tight security and military cooperations, is over. What exactly the United States does next is unclear. But what is clear is that we, as Canadians, have agency. We have power. We are masters in our own home. Nous sommes maîtres chez nous. We can control our destiny. We can give ourselves much more than any foreign government, including the United States, can ever take away. We can deal with this crisis best by building our strength right here at home. It will take hard work. It will take steady and focused determination from governments, from businesses, from labor, from Canadians. We will need to dramatically reduce our reliance on the United States. We will need to pivot our trade relationships elsewhere. And we will need to do things previously thought impossible at speeds we haven't seen in generations.
Okay, so it's interesting watching this guy. I don't know anything about this gentleman. And it looks like he's essentially Justin Trudeau's successor, and as I understand it, a leftist in Canadian government. And I look at this two ways, right? So first, I'm just going to like proxy what I imagine he's trying to do as a head of state for his people, right? And as far as Canada, I have no personal beef with Canada. I think Canadians should do what's right by Canada. And I think as a head of state, it's important for him to put forth a strong front, right? Like, just like I don't want Trump out here coddling other leaders and saying things that make America appear weak. Of course, I think it's important for a Canadian head of state to say things that Canadians are going to resonate with. So I actually posted a thread earlier just asking Canadians, like, what do you think of this? Because I don't really know how much he's representing the will of the people. But I want to talk more generally about the relationship between America and Canada and what's been going on. Because I think a lot of legacy media has been positioning America and Trump as bullies, and this is coming out of nowhere, and this is completely unwarranted, and all of this stuff. And I'm going to read you out some of the tariffs that Canada has had on America, and I'm going to give you some context on where these are coming from. Okay. Now, just so you guys understand, America, Mexico, and Canada have a trade deal. Some of you who are older, you might remember NAFTA, North American Free Trade Agreement. So when Trump got into office in his first term, he got us out of NAFTA and into a new deal called USMCA. So it's a new trade deal that he considered more fair. And by that trade deal, there's 0% tariffs up to a quota on certain goods. So, for example, dairy, milk, dairy, eggs, dairy derivatives, things like that. There's a 0% tariff. So it's all copacetic. Like, we can export, they can export. Like, we're not going to put any additional tax. However, once we reach a certain quota, then tariffs start to apply. And the tariffs that Canada imposes on America are significantly higher than the tariffs that America imposes on Canada. And from a Canadian perspective, I totally understand why they would do that. Because first of all, Canada is a much smaller economy than America. And Canadian politicians are trying to do right by Canadians. So it makes total sense why they would have something like a 250% tariff on milk above quota, 291% for butter, 208% for whey, 241% for cheese. Okay, those are the tariffs that Canada has had on those products coming from the US. And on top of that, people have argued, oh, well, the quotas, they're rarely even hit. So the 0% quotas are more relevant. And they're right. It's only like 5% of the goods that are sent from America to the US in those categories that are even above quota and have those tariffs apply. However, there's a deeper question. Why is that the case? Is it because American dairy and egg farmers just don't want to send these products to Canada because there's no demand in Canada? No. It's because Canada has other protectionist policies in place that make it disincentivize American farmers from even wanting to go to the quota. And American dairy and egg farmers have been complaining about this for a while. Now, Canada's doing right by Canada, and America needs to do right by America. So if there's super high tariffs on these goods in the direction that's favoring Canada, it stands to reason that an American president would want to wonder, why are these super high tariffs in place, and why don't we have similarly high tariffs? And does it make sense to allow this dynamic? If you guys are interested, there's actually a really interesting conversation with our Commerce Secretary, Howard Lutnick. Really fascinating conversation. I invite you to watch the entire conversation, but it's almost 2 hours. If you are shorter on time or you want my take on it, there's also a video on my YouTube, and I'm sure you can scroll through my X profile, but it's easier to find on YouTube, where I break down with specificity what the plan is economically to help average Americans by Trump and his administration, and how they think about tariffs and why. And essentially, Howard Lutnick says this: look, America used to be funded by tariffs. We used to not have an income tax. Income tax is a invention from the last 120-ish years. We instituted an income tax during the World War, the First World War, to help fund the war effort. Before that, we didn't have an income tax. Now, before that, in the 19th century, there was like a small temporary income tax for a period of time, but largely we did not fund ourselves off of income tax. So you largely kept the money that you made. And then we switched over to the income tax to fund the war. And then after the war, Europe was not in great shape because they had just gone through a war. So we didn't impose high tariffs on them, because tariffs only work when there's a lot of trade and other countries are doing well enough to be able to afford the tariffs. And then, the 20s were a good period in America, but in Europe, they were still kind of going through a reconstruction. And then in the 30s, there was the Great Depression. Not a great time to bring back tariffs, right? And then after the 30s, there were the 40s. And what happened in the 40s? World War II. Also not a great time to reinstitute tariffs. After World War II, Europe's in reconstruction. We have the Marshall Plan. We're trying to help them out. Not a good time to start slapping on tariffs again. So over time, this thing that was supposed to be a temporary measure to help fund a war effort became a permanent part of American tax apparatus. And all these tariffs were set on by other countries on the US that never got lifted or lowered. So for a long time, other countries have actually had much higher tariffs on American manufacturing and goods than we've had, vice versa. So when you guys see Trump talking about tariffs, what you don't recognize is the reason other leaders haven't been talking tariffs is because they've already had tariffs on America. So people are viewing this as bullying. I'm viewing it as balancing by our president. Now, I will say the way that Trump has been talking about Canada is sure to piss off Canadians and ruffle the feathers of Canadian politicians, right? Like he's constantly talking about, hey, 51st state, and making jokes about the Canadian anthem and all that stuff. I can see how Canadian citizens are pissed off. I'm not quite sure why Trump is doing this so much, to be honest. I don't know if he's actually serious about wanting to annex Canada. I don't think he's just trying to poke the bear here. I think he has probably a bigger geopolitical play that he has in mind. But I totally understand why Canadians feel offended by it. And I totally understand why the new head of state needs to show a strong front. But from an American perspective, I just invite you to look at this as, hey, we have an American president who's America first. He doesn't subscribe to this, like, it's honestly hasn't even been free trade. It's been free trade if you're getting things from America, or which direction? It's been free trade to the benefit of other countries, not the benefit of America. He hasn't been subscribing to this like globalist idea. And I find that personally really refreshing, because what else has been happening over the last several decades? Our manufacturing base has been eviscerated. We went from 19.6 million jobs in manufacturing to about 12 million. Manufacturing wages have not caught up with the cost of living. We make many things abroad that we rely on here, or we import many things from abroad that we rely on here. For example, many of our active pharmaceutical ingredients that go into things like painkillers and antibiotics come from China. So if we go to war with China, all of a sudden our supply chain for medicine is disrupted, which not only harms people who are reliant on that medicine, it also harms our troops who need that medicine in the midst of battle. Or drones. Ukraine-Russia war, the first war to be, if not primarily drone warfare, heavily drone mediated. Where do 80% plus of the drones that the US uses come from? China. Doesn't need to be the case. We can make drones here, but our manufacturing base has been disrupted for this idea of globalism and free trade, which has been very beneficial to corporations and beneficial to consumers, at least at the surface level, because now we're getting cheaper goods, right? Because it's much cheaper to make things in China and Mexico because they don't have the same standards for workers that we do. So it's like, yeah, you're getting cheap goods, but at what cost? At the cost of national security when your manufacturing base is moving abroad. At the cost of quality manufacturing jobs that blue-collar workers in America relied on for years. At the cost of jobs that would be paying higher wages. At the cost of jobs that people feel proud of, rather than driving, no offense to anyone who does this, but like, driving Uber or just moving around numbers in a cubicle. People used to make physical things with their hands and they could see the physical product. I think that tangibility of your work product, something you're spending 8 hours a day on, is important. So, yeah, I'm actually really happy that Trump has been so aggressive with the tariff talk and talking about moving manufacturing back to America. I think it's actually critically important. And moreover, a lot of people don't know that one of the things that the Trump administration wants to do is abolish the income tax under $150,000. Wouldn't that be amazing? No income tax under $150,000. Imagine how much money goes back into your pocket. That's only possible if we're funding the country through tariffs, if we're cutting government fraud, waste, and abuse, and we have a robust domestic economy that we can make corporate income tax from. So all those things need to happen in order for Americans' money to stay in their pockets rather than constantly going to the IRS to fund a bunch of foreign wars that are endless. We've been in wars constantly for the last several decades. To fund rampant illegal immigration. Fortunately, they're starting to get under control, but rampant illegal immigration. And no, people say illegal immigrants pay taxes. Yes, many of them do. And the cost of the burden on social services outweighs the average amount that an immigrant household, illegal immigrant household, contributes in taxes. So yeah, they pay some of their fair share, but it's not the full amount. And I understand that these people came to America wanting to enjoy a better life. I'm the child of legal immigrants. So I totally understand that. Like, everyone just wants to have a good life. Everyone wants to have the best life that they can, and they're going to move to the best place that they can do it. And at the same time, we got to do things that benefit the community of America first as Americans. Because if we don't look out for ourselves, who's going to do it? Canada's not going to prioritize America's interests first. Europe's not going to do it. China certainly is not. So I'm happy that Trump is doing this, and I fully respect other leaders' rights to do it too. So he's doing what he has to do. And I think a lot of it's posturing. Someone in the chat pointed out that after this speech, Trump said that he got on the phone with, I forget this gentleman's name, and it looks like they're all copacetic. And honestly, I don't think it was ever a big deal to begin with. I think a lot of this is posturing and saber rattling because, look, these guys are playing chess. Everything that they say in public is intentional. And you hope that the intention is to serve their people. A lot of times politicians just say stuff to manipulate people. But I think that Trump is actually refreshing in that he says the thing that is actually serving Americans, even if it's triggering to the rest of the world or even half of America. So I think that's why it's been getting so many headlines rather than these politicians who say things that sound good but don't actually do good by their people, or the world. So I find it incredibly refreshing. And Donna, you're welcome. I'm always happy to talk about this stuff. And yeah, I really encourage you to check out my video on Trump's overall economic plan, because what I did is I took 3 hours of interviews from Howard Lutnick, our Commerce Secretary, Scott Bessent, who's our Treasury Secretary, and I took out the parts that I think are most relevant to the average American, because some of it's very technical, and it's a bunch of billionaires interviewing basically other billionaires. So they're kind of talking about stuff that I think most people don't really care about. But it was actually quite refreshing to see that most of the conversation was actually about how to help the middle and working class in America. So it's a 40-minute video. I probably sunk the most time into making that video out of any other video that I've made. And I hope that you guys enjoy it, because I wish the whole country could watch it, because I think if people watched it, they would understand at least there is a plan. You might disagree with the way that Trump is going about that particular plan, but you can't disagree that there's a plan that ostensibly at least is going to help America. And whether it'll help America, we'll actually see. We get to review that with the midterm elections in 2026 and then the general election in 2028. And that's when the bill comes due for Trump and his team. But in the meantime, take the longer view, because a lot of this tariff stuff, people are just getting emotional. And it's funny, right? Because all of a sudden, everyone considers themselves an expert on economic policy. And they're so confident that they know exactly what tariffs will do. And they say, oh, look, the NASDAQ is down, and I told you it's not working. We're trying to right a ship that has been going in the wrong direction for years. It's a huge ship. You know how long it takes for a ship to turn in the ocean? Give it a moment. Don't just focus on the individual chess moves. Focus on the entire chessboard. So that's what I want to invite you to. I'm not here to convince you that this is the right plan. I don't know if it's the right plan. I'm not an expert on economics, but I want you to at least know what the plan is. And I want you, even if you agree with Trump and you trust him, to trust him because you are informed on the plan, not just because you like the man. think it's cool to like the man, but it's even better if you like the plan. Okay, let's see. Someone said, what are you waiting to leave LA for? I'm actually considering moving out of LA soon. Yeah, I've been in LA for about 10 years now, and it's tough. I really love the land in LA. Like, it's crazy. I live in a mountainous area in LA, and I can go to the beach within a few minutes. I drove an hour and a half east. It was literally snowing in the LA National Forest. And then you can be in the desert in a few hours. So you have everything in one area. I think California truly has the greatest land in the union, bar none. Utah's pretty dope too, but I think California is the best. But we have the best land in the union and the worst government. It's like the LA fires were just a really frustrating experience for me because I looked at it and thought, look, I don't think the fires were unavoidable, but I think they could have been heavily mitigated with sound policy and proper leadership. And we didn't have either. And I've seen the homelessness get worse and worse over time in where I used to live in Santa Monica. It's like, I remember the day that I decided, all right, I need to at least move to another part of LA, was when I was sitting in a park and some dude just starts mouthing off at me. Some homeless dude starts threatening to kill me, calls me the N-word. And this happens for like 10 minutes straight. I'm just like sitting in the park, minding my own business. And this guy goes off on me. So I was like, this is ridiculous. Like, we pay 13% income tax on top of the federal income tax, and this kind of stuff is happening. So yeah, unfortunately, California is just so far left, and there's just so little accountability and actual pressure that they can get away with this stuff. So I'm considering moving to another place. Not sure yet, but I'm probably by the end of this year, I will have moved out of LA. But I do love California, and I kind of want every reason to stay. Let's see here. Okay, so since I don't have any subscriber questions, you know what I'll do? I will answer some respectful questions from the chat. I'll answer them at least briefly. What do you think about the Trevor Milton pardon? I honestly don't know anything about the Trevor Milton pardon. So maybe I'll look into it, but no opinion for now, just because I don't know the details of his case. I do know that many people were upset with it, and it seemed like it was a huge miss from many people who are Trump supporters, but I don't have a personal opinion. Wayne says, yeah, his whole stick with tariffs is reciprocity. Exactly. Reciprocity. Oh, and by the way, the reciprocity doesn't need to be tariff for tariff either, right? It doesn't need to even be, okay, you put 250% tariff above quota on our milk, so we'll put a 250% tariff over quota on your milk. No, it could be, hey, we want you to stem the flow of fentanyl over your border. Now, there's a lot more fentanyl that comes from Mexico over the southern border that comes from Canada over the northern border. A lot more, like orders of magnitude more. However, even tiny amounts of fentanyl can kill thousands and thousands of people. So at least publicly, that's one of the reasons that the Trump administration has cited for putting tariffs on Canada. It's like, hey, we want you to stop allowing the flow of drugs that are killing American citizens. And that's just one example of a case where, hey, there might be something quantitative like a tariff that's supposed to produce a qualitative outcome, like reducing the stem of drugs over our border. So it's a complicated chess game where you're exchanging rooks for knights and pawns for queens, hopefully in America's case, and bishops and all of that. So it's a complicated game. And I think the most important thing is, I think for everyone, and this is like just general life advice, just demonstrate some intellectual humility. Like if you don't understand, like very few people actually know what's going on, then don't become reactionary and don't become so confident that you know whether this is going to work or not. But the general philosophy, yes, is reciprocity. So thanks for mentioning that, Wayne. Lori Locke says, Canadian here. The unelected new temporary PM is deep state and bought by WEF. Yeah, I mean, look, from what I've heard, it does sound like Canada's been going through some cultural degeneracy and rot like America has been going through, but even worse. And it's even more far left than America is. So if that's the case, like, I wish y'all the best of luck, because it took a lot for America to get out of it. And I think a lot of people were hoping that this guy, I think it's Pierre Poilievre, was, I mean, when I just listening to him, the few clips that I've seen of him was like, okay, there we go. This guy's like seems like a strong man who's willing to say things and go toe to toe with Trump, which I think is healthy for Canada. But this is purely subjective. Just keep that in mind. But listening to this guy who's saying Canada's leaving America, we're going to do it ourselves, I didn't feel any energy from the guy. Like, he just didn't have that vigor, that strength. He didn't strike me as someone who actually has the force of character to get things done. And that's important, right? Like, ultimately, I think part of the reason why Trump is so respected by world leaders, like he's clearly respected by world leaders even if they don't like him, is because he's a strong man. He's an alpha male. He says what he thinks, and he's very unapologetic about it. And if Canada's even more far left than America is, then they need someone like that. Same thing for much of Europe. I mean, I released this video about Conor McGregor talking about Ireland. Basically, he wants to make Ireland great again. And he's talking about the immigration issues in Ireland. And for those of you who don't know, Ireland is going through a housing crisis. They have a shortage of housing. And they don't have tons of illegal immigration. But when you're having a housing crisis, like, any illegal immigration puts a strain on the existing strain of social fabric. So, yeah, it sounds like in Europe, especially Germany and England, there's been a lot of the same open borders nonsense, pushing for multiculturalism, but letting their local culture just be eroded. And it's sad to see, right? Because it's like, I want to go to Italy and it's Italian. I want to go to France and it's French. I want to go to England and it's English. I want to hear English accents. I want to see English works and eat English food. And is it cool to see people from other countries in England? Sure. But, you want to see majority English people. I think America is different because America is a melting pot. But even in the melting pot, you want to be intentional about the ingredients that you add to the melting pot. That's why you don't just open the borders. You don't just like open your house and allow anyone to throw whatever they want in the melting pot that you're cooking for dinner. It doesn't make any sense. But Europe, seems even far left and even more gone. And they seem to be more agitated about a war going on between Ukraine and Russia than the decline of all of their states. It's insanity to me. So I think it's tougher for those countries because, unlike in America, where we have free speech as a sacred principle, and when things are going badly, there's an expectation that you speak out as well as an ability to do so. It doesn't seem to nearly be the case in especially the UK. Like, I don't even know if people in the UK can say what they actually believe online without at least the fear of getting arrested. Now, maybe that's been blown out of proportion, but even if it exists in some proportion, as a citizen in the UK, I don't even know what you do. And as I understand it, they're having an exodus of their wealthy elites. And you might not like wealthy elites, but if English, the most capable people in English society get rich and then leave England, it's not a good thing for the English spirit. So, yeah, I wish the best for Canadians. I want my president to do what's best by America. And I believe that if everyone does what's best for them, then people can actually pour from a full cup and actually do things like foreign aid and negotiate deals that benefit everyone. And I think what's happening right now is a rewriting and rebalancing of the global order. And I think that's a good thing. Okay, fun stream. To recap here, some of you are going to disagree with my views on the Mahmoud Khalil and Ozturk situation and the deportations. And look, what I want to invite you to consider is, hey, do I even know specifically, not like vague stuff about these people hate America or Hamas, do I know specifically what these people have done? And do I think that's sufficient grounds for the government to use the executive authority that they do have to deport these people from the country? That's the first question. It's not about technicalities. I'm not saying they can't do it. I'm saying in order for the people to trust their government, the government needs to create reasons for the people to trust them. The governed don't just automatically trust their government. The more that the government provides proof, the more that we'll trust them. That's all. So I want to see some proof. I don't want to see people in X comment sections having to give me a better justification for deporting these people than Secretary of State Mark Rubio. Doesn't even make any sense. And even to the extent that Mahmoud Khalil has done some things, and again, I literally made a video, so I'm pretty well informed on this. I would like to hear that come from the Secretary of State's mouth, not my mouth. And I would like for him to prove that and provide even just the philosophy so we even understand, like, yeah, what are the rules here for the actions of Columbia University Apartheid Divest being actions that Mahmoud Khalil is liable for. And in the case of Ozturk, I have seen nothing that she's done that warrants deportation. So I would really like to hear some more explanation there. And have a great weekend. Remember, politics is there to support your life, not be your life. So if politics is draining you, maybe take some time away, recharge, connect with loved ones, and just be decent, be loving, be kind to one another. See you Monday at 1 p.m. Peace. No, I'm still here. Bye, guys. I don't know why the stream's not ending. You saw me. I was just looking at X. Good thing I didn't say anything crazy. Bye.